Evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us here this evening for this special study session of the Monrovia City Council this Tuesday, December 17th at 5:30 p.m., but I will call the meeting to order at 5:34. Okay, then we will have our Pledge of Allegiance, and that will be led by Councilmember Larry Spicer.
Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Larry. Okay, roll call.
Council members Belden.
Here.
Jimenez.
Here.
Spicer.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Dr. Kelly. And Mayor Sheplin.
Here. Public input. Do we have any requests for public input on items on our agenda?
I have received none.
And the one that we received, that's for our regular council meeting,
I think there may be one for the study session.
oh, that's one is for the study session. So you all have one from, that was emailed to us from Genevieve Sheehan. Do we need to read that or anything? Okay. But I will acknowledge that we did have one via email. Okay, then moving right along, then we are going to have discussion, our potential inclusionary housing program, and I believe Ms. Bermejo is going to lead us in that discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the City Council. That is right. Tonight, we are here to continue our discussion and study of an inclusionary housing ordinance. And to assist us this evening, to assist staff, we have David Blumenthal. He's with Sagecrest Environmental. On her way is Miss Kathy Head from Kaiser Marston. She should be joining us shortly. And in preparation for tonight, staff did submit supplemental information to supplement the agenda. That included PowerPoint. We've updated the slides slightly since last Thursday. We've submitted a draft inclusionary housing ordinance. Now, it's important to note that it's not normal to actually provide a draft housing ordinance at this point in our kind of exploring of this topic. We did it really as a point of reference to what an inclusionary housing ordinance looks like, to kick off the discussion further and to think about other considerations that should be considered. The ordinance that you received will likely not look the way it does should the council move forward based on all the feedback that we still need to receive. And my part of the presentation this evening will be to go over some of the basics, some of the stuff we've already seen, a recap of what is affordable housing, what's our RHNA requirement, other considerations that might generate questions. And then I'm going to turn it over to Mr. David Blumenthal, who's going to go over components of an ordinance and kind of drill in deeper on the topics and the consideration pieces that would be built into an ordinance. Okay, so I guess first and foremost, the first question is, why are we here this evening? And we all know that we are living in a housing crisis. Throughout the city's housing element process, we did significant surveys, and everyone, a good portion of the community basically has the feeling that there's not enough affordable housing for families at all income levels in the city. And that's just not a Monrovia matter, that's happening across California. And as a result, all counties in Los Angeles County received either a housing element program requirement to adopt an ordinance or to study the potential inclusionary housing ordinance to see if that's right for their city. Now, for Monrovia, Our program just requires us to explore it. We do not have to adopt an ordinance based on our city's certified housing element. And I think being here tonight is very important because we're fulfilling this program. And it's important to note that as we consider a housing ordinance of this such, there are several things that need to be considered. So and that's primarily because these ordinances are not one size fits all. So we kicked off our discussion about inclusionary housing at the September 3rd meeting this year. We discussed the various community benefits an inclusionary housing ordinance may have, as well as the developer benefits. So it does provide means of providing affordable housing, primarily at the very low and low income levels. It's a tool, it's one tool of many tools to help achieve the city's regional housing needs allocation that's was stipulated by the state. It increases the variety and mix of housing types. Inclusionary housing is most often seen and associated with mixed-use, multifamily mixed-use projects or just multifamily residential projects. And then the developers, it is, an additional requirement for them. There are some benefits that they can receive, and that is on depending on the threshold, right, of affordability, they have incentives through the state density bonus law where they can receive density bonuses, reduce parking standards, tax incentives, and then waivers and concessions of development standards to make projects more feasible and cheaper for them. At the September meeting, we received some feedback from the City Council. And the feedback we outlined on this slide, basically, the council expressed the need to balance the needs of the community with development rights. If affordable housing is a requirement is put into an ordinance, the City Council suggested that it be maintained affordable through appropriate timeframes and monitored. An ordinance would need to have a very clear approval process, and the developer would need to understand how much would need to be included, would need to be easy to calculate and administer by staff. And then there were some other questions that were thrown out there. How can the city ultimately reduce the cost of housing? And I think there's several ways that we're doing that, and we're going to be continuing to do that through the implementation of our housing element. And some of those are reducing government constraints. And we are ongoing, consistently always looking at how we can reduce governmental constraints when it comes to streamlining review processes for developing housing. I wanted to showcase these slides again. The council has seen them before. When we talk about affordable housing, what do we mean, especially when we're talking about income limits? Every county establishes affordable housing income limits based on area median income. So this slide highlights that, for example, a family of four, the area median income for a family of four is about $98,200. And that area median income is the piece of the calculation that contributes to how do we calculate the incomes at extremely low, and moderate. And this slide shows that you can see for extremely low, for example, that's calculated based on 30% of the area median income. This slide is also a repeat slide, but it's important just to remind us of what affordable housing rental rates look like. The rental rates are also based on area median income. They're also based on bedroom unit size and the number of bedrooms in units. So for example, looking at this slide, a 2-bedroom unit can occupy 3 persons. So we look at the 3-person household column, and we can see the various incomes for very low, low, and moderate.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
For the, where it says, for example, a 2-person household, 982, is that suggesting what they should be able to afford? Is that suggesting what the average price is right now? Only, I'm asking this question because I've not seen 982 rent anywhere, so I'm very curious as to what does that number mean specifically?
Right. So this table demonstrates the various rental rates that would be charged if units are set aside for very low, low income, and moderate. It's important to note even though it calculates household size at the top, the rental rate's based on the number of bedrooms in a unit.
Isn't that the number of bedrooms, maybe?
Yeah.
That's what she just said.
It's not the people in the household, right?
It's a number, it's the household size and the number of bedroom. So for example, a single bedroom can accommodate 2 people.
Right.
And based on this, we're seeing the rental rates at very low, low, and moderate
Okay,
that are established by the area median income.
so the source is the state of California for these numbers.
And LA County publishes these numbers
So it's
on their
LA
website.
County, not the state, that's giving us these numbers.
The calculations come through the state and get passed through the county,
Okay,
and
so
then they're
it's-
published on the city's website.
Are they adjusted every year?
Yes, every year, new
CPI?
numbers are published.
Okay.
Yeah, these are great questions.
And those are the amounts that would be dictated for the particular income group.
Correct.
And so a developer would have to decide then how he makes up the difference between that low, very low, or whatever it is, and the market rate.
Correct.
Right.
And, yeah, and, don't want to get into too much detail, because this is complicated, but these numbers, the rental rates are based on 30% what you do is you take the area median income, you multiply it by 50% for very low, okay? And then 30% of that number is what the rental rate ends up being.
So if there's a pot of money, that developer would be able to request
Correct.
some of that money to offset
That is correct.
that particular income level.
Right.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what?
So,
I'm not going to repeat it.
yeah, so there are several questions that pop into people's minds when they look at this chart. One is, it would be great to be able to rent a 2-bedroom unit
At that-
for $1,105, right? That's what the community desire is. Oftentimes, though, you have the developer desire, and that is, oh gosh, that's not much money. The cost for that unit is going to be more for me. If the city were to have a program with an in lieu fee, and the in lieu fees collected, there would be an opportunity to offset some of the cost of producing that unit.
Sure. This is kind of based on market rates, but and I think there's a survey that comes out every 2 years, right, Mary, that tells us what people are currently paying in Monrovia. We have a lot of folks that have been in Monrovia for a long time paying, and renters. And I think actually many of these levels that what they're paying currently is actually lower than what our market rates we know are extremely
Absolutely.
high, right?
Like an
So-
800 square foot unit's about up to $3,000.
Right now on market,
Correct.
let's say, right? But what are people actually paying, since we do have a lot of long-term tenants that are actually much lower than that? Because they've been here for a long time, and rent increases have not hit them, and now you're capped in terms of how much you can actually raise that rent. So I think that's also comparable for us to think about, because we hear affordable housing, people think this is going to be units that are even below what they're currently paying. The reality is that these numbers are higher than what most people are actually renting for in Monrovia. So the dream of those $3,000 market rate units, it's a great dream for some folks to be thinking that's what they should charge for rent. But the reality is that most people are not paying that number, and we should think about that as well.
So most of these, is it fair to say most of these numbers are aspirational?
These numbers are set, these are,
The ideal, it's the ideal. Aspirational ideal?
This is a benchmark. So if we have an affordable housing requirement and it requires a low-income housing unit, this chart is showing what the expected rental rate is going to be for a two-bedroom unit.
Okay, does this information take into account the differences between communities? If you look at rentals in Almani, Arcadia, and Monrovia, there's a big difference. Does this information take that into consideration, or is it one size fits all?
These standards are for all of LA County.
Well, it's big differences from city to city.
I was just going to say a quick, do we have on one of the slides at all the current rates?
Rental
Monrovia?
rates?
Yeah.
We don't, but we can probably try to look that up as we go.
Well, I Googled it real
Oh,
fast, and I wasn't trying to get ahead of you there, but according to Google, in Monrovia, the average rent in Monrovia for a two-bedroom is $2,251 per month. That's what AI said.
For two-bedroom?
Yes.
Versus what they're renting,
No, that's the what the average rate in Monrovia for a two-bedroom apartment is $2,251, if you want to believe AI.
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead now, the next slide. This slide showcases, again, the RENA requirement that we had for our fifth cycle housing element, and our sixth cycle, which we're currently in. It also shows the progress of what was completed in the fifth cycle and where we are today within the sixth cycle. It also totals the housing production in that last column of all the housing produced at the various income levels for the two cycles. And the takeaway, again, the council has seen this before, is we were able to achieve some very low-income housing units, and those primarily were located in our Station Square Transit Village. We also were able to achieve some moderate income units. Those were also in the Station Square area. And the takeaway is, though, we have not been able to achieve any units in that low-income category. But we are doing excellent in achieving above moderate income units.
Sorry, that's the white what we did versus what the green is what we were supposed to hit?
The green, the first two columns, the middle two columns, the fifth cycle, 2014 to 21, that was our requirement
Right.
goal for fifth cycle, 2014 to 2021. The next column where it says sixth cycle in the green, that's our current goal. It's what we're trying to achieve through the end of 2029.
So on a percentage base, how off are we?
We are overachieving in the above moderate. We're underachieving in the very low, low, and moderate income.
And those
By
are
like
the ones
90%
that-
on each case or something?
Yeah, those are the, okay.
Can I ask Craig a question? Have they already added it to the income levels? Because I know that HCD was going to add like it was below the very low income level. Has that been added?
Not yet, right? Yeah, it'll be effective with the next
Okay.
housing element cycle, not this one.
Right, so there is even a lower one that's being proposed for the next cycle of RENA.
Okay. Now, another piece, so that chart, those goals were published and incorporated into our certified housing element. Another piece of information that I felt was important for the council's consideration is with that goal, the set of goals, the housing element also included a plan and an idea of where those housing units were anticipated to be captured. This slide represents our sites inventory. This was the parcels of land where the city felt, one, we would have the highest potential of meeting the RENA goals. The slide shows that we have several parcels that are projects that were already contributing to the RENA goals. That's Avalon, Alexin, 127 Pomona, Station Square, Arroyo, some other residential projects, 910 South Ivy, 425 West Duarte, 715 to 721 West Doherty. Those are the lettered parcels in the slide. There are also numbered parcels, and those are parcels where development hasn't yet happened, but we suspect, based on the land use in place, the land use plan, that it will attract development in these areas. These areas were also selected because they have the ability to achieve densities of 30 or more units, and the city has received development interest. This slide showcases where in the city we have higher densities, again, to attract larger projects. Again, you can see Station Squares, the PD12 area, and South Myrtle Avenue corridor. The general plan was set up to encourage the higher density in these two predominant areas. Other areas of the city where you can achieve 54 units per acre is the RH zone. There are larger parcels in the RH zone near the station along Doherty Road. Okay, and then to supplement additional information, this is just kind of take in and think about. We wanted to make sure the council had an idea of what we were developing overall. So this slide showcases 3 years of development. It shows how many of our projects are yielding units that are single-family, projects that are 2 to 4 units in size, 5 units or more projects, and then accessory dwelling units. And the reason why I wanted to showcase this slide is because we can see that the 5+ unit category is where we're getting the more units developed. But I also want to say that that 5+ category includes small projects like 5, 6, 7 unit projects, but it largely includes the bigger developments that are occurring in Station Square. I think there might be just 2 or 3 that make up that 308 total.
Can I ask a question? Is that unit, so is that 308 of 5+ units, that could be
Those are
2 projects?
It could be, yes, there are
Okay.
multiple projects over, these are averages. These are average numbers over 3 years, 21, 22, and 23.
I would be interested also knowing how many projects in those different categories we have for those next years. That makes sense.
Yeah,
That's in
we
the
could,
pipeline?
we could definitely bring those
Or,
forward.
Built in the past.
Yeah, so our general plan annual report will
pipeline?
be released, that is an annual report we have, so we have the numbers for all 3 of those years that we can share.
And could we have more clarification? Like, for example, instead of saying 5+ units, if you could have, the next category would be 5 to, I don't know, 20 units, and then the project's 20 units and above, just to see if there's some moderate number of units, smaller construction.
Yes, we can definitely do that.
That seems extremely broad category, 5+ units and above.
And that's a state of California category that's used to track housing in our general plan annual report. So what we did is staff took those categories since it's the same language with the state. What I can tell you is the 5+ category, very few projects, a handful, are less than 12 units. The number of units that are filling that bucket are the larger projects, the Alexans, the Station Square South projects. We have very few 12-unit, lower density projects.
Right, and that only covers 21 to 23 because we had quite a few units approved prior to that time.
That is correct. And then other information we wanted to provide the city council this evening is, what is happening in the San Gabriel Valley? There are, get my, 30 cities that make up the San Gabriel Valley and belong to the San Gabriel Valley COG. And this slide showcases half the cities really haven't done anything yet. They don't have an ordinance in place. There's about 10 cities, or 33% of those cities have adopted an ordinance. And then there's about 17% or 5 cities right now that are in the same boat that Monrovia is in. We're studying the potential for having an inclusionary housing ordinance. And we have a few next slides that actually show what type of thresholds and requirements other cities in our region are doing. I think the takeaway that's really important that I wanted to impart is because there's no one-size-fits-all ordinance, you'll see through these charts that every city has a little bit of a different requirement. This one showcases Alhambra. Their trigger is 7+ units. Their requirement is 15%. Claremont has a 5+. The formulas for calculating what applies vary from city to city. Some cities apply their ordinance citywide. Some, like Covina, use it to just specific areas, such as a specific plan area. And then they base it based on the type of a project, so 100% residential and a mixed-use project, and then their thresholds vary depending on that project type. El Monte recently adopted theirs in 2023. Their ordinance kicks in at 10%, so 10 units or more. And they have a 15% requirement that's broken up by both low and moderate.
Is there an average that you see in the number of applicable units as well as a percentage requirement?
There's not an average, and I think, once we get our team up here, our consultants who really know this stuff, they're the technical experts, I think the one thing, and the reason why we could do an average, but I don't know how helpful that would be. And the reason why is every city's different. Every city has different rental rates, different needs. Monrovia is very different than other cities in our region. Not only have I seen through my time being here, working alongside the city council in the community, for example, there's concern about financial impacts of an inclusionary housing ordinance. We've also heard discussion about neighborhood compatibility impacts or potential impacts on our historic resources. So based on every city's what we cherish, what the city cherishes, it's not just a financial thought that goes into this consideration.
It's based on the values of the city.
Correct. There's a lot of variables.
Sherry, on that list, I believe it was Duarte had actually passed one in the early 2000s, and then they put it on hold. And correct me if I'm wrong, I want to say they had actually revoked theirs. I know there was a combination of a few cities that actually passed inclusionary ordinances, and they either put them on hold or they actually revoked them because they found at the end of the day that it didn't actually create the level of affordable housing or even additional units that they had hoped.
Through our analysis, we found that they did have one. I don't know the ultimate status of it being revoked, but it's currently not being, it's not in
Right.
effect.
It's at least on hold.
Correct. Here's some more examples, and then we probably still, this is just a snapshot. I think it would be a good time at this point, I think with the feedback, to bring up our consultants now and have them run through the different components of an ordinance, and considerations, and start the conversation that goes into this process. So I'll turn this over to David at this point.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. My name, again, is David Blumenthal. I'm principal with Sagecrest Planning and Environmental, and we also have with us tonight Kathy Head with Kaiser Marston, who prepared the fiscal impact report on this ordinance tonight. Just to reiterate some of the things Sherry did mention, Monrovia is absolutely a unique city, just like every LA County city, and we don't want to base your ordinance on what other cities are really doing, because what the citizens of Monrovia face are completely different than what the citizens of Duarte or Arcadia or any other cities in the area do face. So we want to design an ordinance that's meant for you on that. The Kaiser Marston fiscal study was done just for Monrovia based on actual circumstances within Monrovia. So it wouldn't be applicable to other cities either. It only would apply here to Monrovia. Now, when we consider a inclusionary housing ordinance, state law gives you a lot of flexibility here. State law basically says that you can adopt an inclusionary housing ordinance, and the only provision it puts on that is that you have to have an alternative means of compliance, such as a in lieu fee. But it does give you the rest of the ability is entirely up to the city.
Excuse me, can I have just a little bit of clarification there? So in our housing element, that we have to either have an inclusionary, or research inclusionary housing, or an in lieu fee, we have to have that?
No, our housing element stipulates that the city of Monrovia should study the idea of adopting an
Okay.
ordinance. And then,
Yeah, I was going to say, and what state law says is if you adopt that inclusionary housing, you have to give the developers an
Okay,
out.
I get it.
Which
I
is
get it.
the in lieu of.
I-
fee.
Would be
right,
one of
I
the
get it.
options would be the in lieu fee.
I was thinking that you meant, okay, I
Yes,
gotcha.
absolutely.
Gotcha.
No, we do, and I know the draft ordinance has been kind of circulated with you. You know, the content of an ordinance, we have those kind of 11 points that you see on the screen for you. But tonight, I really want to focus your attention on the 4 kind of policy decisions that need to be made for Monrovia if you decide to move forward with the ordinance. And that does include, you know, where and who it would apply to, what kind of requirement you want to place on it, what type of projects you want to exempt, and what are those alternative means of compliance. So when we talk about the number of units that it would apply to, you know, we see typical range between 3 and 20 units as the minimum trigger requirement for that. Recommendation tonight is actually 5 units. You know, that recommendation is based on the 5 units triggers the density bonus as well, too. So that's where the developers start seeing the benefits of providing the affordable housing. Below that, you're going to start getting into your single-family home developments, and you're going to start seeing the developers do not get any kind of benefit for the smaller projects. Now, I will note that there was a survey done of the city, and as part of that survey, the city did receive a petition. Petition had 123 signatures on it, and that did request that the inclusionary be at 10 units. Along with that, there were 2 comments on the survey, and both those comments said they should be triggered at 8 units. So with that, the second part of this is what is the inclusionary housing requirements? I'd like to bring Kathy up, and she could talk a little bit about the percentages that you see before you tonight and how those were developed, and where those recommendations are coming from. Sorry.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. I'm Kathy Head. I'm president of Kaiser Marston, and I did the financial analysis. I wanted to just start, since I was invited up here, just to talk about rent, which you talked about earlier in the conversation. The one thing to look at, and what we looked at when we did our survey as part of our financial analysis, is we looked at projects that have been built within the last 10 years. So we looked at newer development projects because they reflect what's being developed in the community. So the rents for those projects, the newer projects, which are largely the large projects as well that have happened near the train station, are significantly higher than the averages you were talking about. So that's one of the key assumptions of the analysis, is that we're looking at new development and then higher rents. And so that, because what we're looking for in the affordability gap, or in the analysis of how much inclusionary can be supported, is to look at the affordability gap between unrestricted market rents, very low income rents, moderate income rents. And then, once we figure that out, the other thing that has to be taken into account is the other side, because it'd be great if you could just say, okay, we're going to fill this affordability gap and the developers are going to bear all that cost. But we need to figure out something that's not confiscatory and does not deprive an owner of a fair and reasonable return on their investment. So then it becomes this balancing act of, yes, it's going to impact developers largely, and then, yes, it's going to create affordable units, but probably not as many as you want. And so one thing I always want to say is don't expect inclusionary to solve your entire arena problem, because it won't. But it's just one tool in your basket to look at. The other thing to look at, and which has been touched on, and which is going to be really important in implementation if you go forward with this, is folks wanting to use density bonus. And so because of the way the density bonus law is structured and because of the Napa case, which I can get into in more depth if you're interested, is if you have a requirement for affordable and inclusionary, and if a developer wants to do the affordable required to get density bonus, and if they meet the more stringent of the two income and rent standards, you have to count that unit towards both the density bonus obligation and the inclusionary. So there is a really strong incentive, especially for folks who want more density, or in your case, in cases where you don't have density limits, where they want the concessions, incentives, or development standards waivers, is to use the density bonus as a means of fulfilling an inclusionary requirement. So that kind of adds a carrot to what is otherwise a stick. Because there's a court case, it's the San Jose versus the BIA court case, that says inclusionary is a planning tool. It's not an exaction. I mean, it acts like an exaction, but it's not. It's a planning tool. It's within your police power to do this because you have an unmet need for affordable housing. But it does definitely impact a developer's economics, ultimately. And so, again, the balancing act. So what we try to do when we do our analysis then is to make sure we're not imposing too stringent a requirement, because as the BIA will be happy to tell you, 15% of zero is zero. And I hear that a lot because I'm in a lot of cities. And so that's how we came to the conclusions that we're talking about. So if you look at the standard here for the rental, where I suggested that you have two different standards, the primary reason for that is an inclusionary and affordable housing requirement hits a small project harder than it hits a large project because there are fewer units to spread the impact across. So again, since you don't want to impact these projects, you have a couple options. One is to establish, and let me say this, let me preface back to this, is you have to have a production requirement and an inclusionary housing requirement. Inclusionary housing is a production-based program. Now, you can make an in lieu fee as easy or as hard as you want to make it usable or be able to be paid, but you have to start with a production requirement. Otherwise, you're doing an impact fee rather than an in lieu fee for fulfilling production. So, depending on where you end up setting your threshold, and as has been discussed, the threshold, I do work on a lot of these. I've worked on thresholds that start at 1, and I have a threshold in one city that's 100. Okay, so, and strangely, they average to about 5. You know, the median is about 5, and the average is about 8.
I noticed, wasn't it Pomona that says 0?
Yeah, it's 1. I
Yeah.
mean, I actually
Yeah,
worked on
but right.
Pomona.
Okay.
I worked on Claremont, I worked on Pomona, I worked on El Monte, I worked on Alhambra. So, and I actually worked on Duarte a million years ago.
So utilizing this, what would the AMI be on this here?
Okay, so the low
Would it be
income.
30 to 30% to
No, so
50%?
low income, as defined in the statute, is 50% of area median to 80% of area median.
Okay. Well, that's the same thing you gave me, Sherry.
That's lucky. So anyway, so when we did the analysis, recognizing that projects that are smaller are impacted more heavily, we suggested a lower standard than for projects that are larger. The other thing we recommended is that for rental projects, that any project with 20 or fewer units be allowed to pay an in lieu fee by right. And so, as Sherry was talking about earlier in her presentation, one way to set, there's a myriad of ways to set an in lieu fee, but one way to set the in lieu fee when you want it to mirror your inclusionary housing production requirement is to base it on the affordability gap. So if you require one low-income unit, for example, I have the ownership up, let me pull rental up. so one low-income unit has an affordability gap of, let's make sure I'm in the right place, yes, of about $468,000. Okay, so that's the cost to a developer of providing that one, forgetting density bonus, so not with the benefits created by density bonus. And so if you're requiring a project to provide, say, one inclusionary unit, then and you're assessing the affordability gap, then it would be a $468,000 fee. Well, you can imagine what that would do to a 6-unit project. All right, so the idea is to not only to allow an in lieu fee to be paid by right for small projects, but in fact to discount it so that until you get to 20 units, at 20 units, you're paying 100% of the affordability gap. And at 6 units, you're paying 1/15 of that affordability gap. And then if you're at 7 units, you're paying 2/15, and if you're 8, you're using 3/15, as a means of not creating as big an impact. So that's the rental. On the ownership side, first off, our suggestion is, let me go back to that one, is because of the magnitude of the affordability gaps with moderate income units, and this is true in any cities that have high home values, is, as also Sherry mentioned during her presentation, it's an LA, the affordables are all based on an LA County number, the one-size-fits-all LA County that doesn't reflect, and it was mentioned by council members, doesn't reflect the specific characteristics of any community. And so what's important, though, when you're establishing inclusionary, because you need to focus it on the county percentages, then is to say, well, gosh, if the average market rate price is $1 million, then there's only so many affordable units you can support because, again, you don't want to create a constraint to development. And so when we ran those numbers, the weighted average affordability gap per unit was about $400,000 based on a moderate income requirement. So the affordable, just so you know, so the affordable price for a moderate income 2-bedroom unit when we did the analysis was $314,000. And the moderate income price for a 3-bedroom unit was $344,000. So then you compare that to what the average market rate price is, and you get your affordability gap. So again, doing that, we came to the conclusion that a 10% moderate income requirement could be supported. Now, what I've recommended in my analysis is that you allow any ownership project to pay the in lieu fee. And the reason for that is because the affordability gaps are big per unit, and because your ultimate goal is to create affordable housing units that remain affordable, it's more efficient to not have lottery winners getting very expensive units, and only a few of them, as opposed to getting an in lieu fee that you can then use to help assist in rental projects, which when somebody rents a unit, they don't expect to achieve equity return. They're not expecting to achieve appreciation on the unit. And so they move in, they move out. But again, because otherwise, you need to create. If you're going to have people produce the ownership units, then and you want them to stay in the inventory, then you have folks sell and resell at the affordable price over a long term. Well, what happens is those folks, especially in LA County, the LA County median income doesn't change that much, and so if they have to sell and resell at affordable, and for example, if they bought an affordable house in 2020 and they went to sell it now. In 2020, they had a 3% interest rate. In 2024, they have a 7% interest rate. Mm-hmm. And given the fact that in LA County, the median income didn't change at all between 23 and 24, you have folks losing money when they go to sell, which is tough because I think a goal is typically, the policy goal is you're trying to create an opportunity for people to build some equity when you have a home ownership.
No one would lose money in that case. There's no loss. It's an imaginary loss, but there's no loss to that homeowner that was going to resell that house. They'd still make a.
No.
How-
The
how's
affordable
that-
price is less in 2024 than it was in 2020.
The housing costs went down.
The moderate income house, no, the sales prices have gone up.
Yeah.
But if you have to resell it affordable,
They lowered that value, you're saying.
because it's formulaically determined based on a percentage of the median income. The median income didn't change and the interest rates went up.
Right.
So no, the
Yeah.
price, the literal price that you would have them sell the unit at is less than they paid for in
Okay.
2020.
Good to know.
Can I ask, though, for clarification on, say there is equity, and you're selling it to an affordable buyer. So what happens with that equity?
Well, so what happens is it's lost. So effectively, what you've done is you've established an artificial price,
Right.
right? And so the unit costs significantly more to be built, so the developer ate that cost.
Correct.
Then the home buyer bought the house, let's just say the home buyer bought the house for $360,000 in 2020. Right. Now, in 2024, based on affordable prices, they could afford $340,000, the new buyer. So now seller one has to sell it to seller two for $340,000, right? Now, so seller two is now getting a home that's worth $1 million, you know, or $800,000. They're getting that, but they can't sell it for that, so their value
Correct.
really is that
Oh, okay.
340. And so that $20,000 is just gone.
And the same then, if you were to borrow on the home, is that, are you capable of doing that under the affordable housing guidelines? If that buyer or that owner then wants to take a loan, say they need to do improvements or they need to do something on the home, then what happens?
Well, see, and these are all excellent questions, and this is the issue. And there's no right or wrong answer, you just need to understand what the ramifications are. Because one, if you have the long-term covenant, you keep an affordable unit in your inventory, which is obviously a positive goal. But you've got homeowners then who, A, can never finance the house for more than the affordable cost, right?
Okay.
And so over time, when they need a new roof, or they
They
need
wouldn't
new
be able
plumbing,
to-
then they're going to have to come up with cash to fund that, and then run, again, the risk that when they go to resell the unit, they won't be able to recoup that cost. So that's the downside of an irrevocable covenant, the upside being you get to keep the unit. The other way to do it, which is commonly done, and if you look at the cities, so if you look at Claremont and
I was,
Pomona.
Claremont is the one I was talking about because I know they had that problem.
Okay, so Claremont, what they did, because I've worked on the Claremont inclusionary for the last 20 years, literally, is their original premise was, and still is, but they've changed their ordinance around, is that the first time the home buyer sells, they sell at market, unrestricted to anybody who wants to buy it at the highest price they can sell it. And then what happens upon that sale is that whatever the original affordability gap of the unit was, and this is all written into a loan agreement, the promissory note, and deed of trust, is whatever that original affordability gap is due to the city. So the seller one has to give that money to the city, and whatever, so let's just say it was a $500,000 house, and the affordable price was $200,000. So that's $300,000 loan there's no money changes in
Right,
it's all
right,
paper.
right.
So there's $300,000 they have to pay back. Also, so they were 40% of the original purchase price. So then 40% of the net gain from the sale of the unit is also paid back to the city. So what that means, what's really happened, and it's happened, I mean, because we've been doing the program started in 2007, but didn't really get going until 2012 because of the global real estate recession, is it's like a deferred in lieu fee. So instead of taking in lieu fee up front from your developers, what you're doing is as each seller sells, you're getting some of that money back in the form of.
But they only allow that on the first sale.
Correct. So then the rent, well, they didn't even have rental till 2021. Because, well, there are a couple of reasons. One, when they originally adopted in 2007, you could do rental, but then in 2009, the Palmer decision said you couldn't do rental, inclusionary. And then it wasn't until 2017 that the governor signed legislation that said, yes, you can do rental.
Can I take notice what time it is, and I just want to make sure that I think we could go on for
And I'm
a
chatty,
long
so you
time
should
here.
stop me.
Okay. I just want to know how long we can go before so we have enough time for our closed session.
5 minutes?
So I'm done. It's been nice talking to you.
Yeah, I'd say we want to target, any questions at the very end, but I'd say probably no later than 10 till. So I think we have another half hour. We can push it to if needed.
Okay. All
Okay.
right.
I'm nearby.
All right.
I'll kind of go through the rest of this presentation a little bit quickly.
Well, and we'll try to be quiet so that you can get through it. Everyone.
So the third part of this is, of course, what kind of projects should be exempted from any type of inclusionary requirement. We do recommend that any replacement units be exempted. So if you have a property with 5 units on it right now, a developer wants to come in with 6 units, the inclusionary would only apply, I'm sorry, developer comes in with 11 units, the inclusionary would only apply to the 6 units they're adding. The existing units would be exempt from those requirements. Obviously, any type of ADUs within the 6 should be exempted. With the 5-unit trigger, you only get 3 ADUs plus the main house of 4 units on single family, so you wouldn't really trigger that with 5. But if you go below 5, we should make sure that's included. Emergency shelters, assisted living facilities, single-room occupancies, and those, again, are the motel kind of conversions meant for 2 adults with, 1 adult with up to 2 children. And then the transitional and supportive housing, which the city is required to provide as part of state law, your housing element. Kathy did touch already on the fees here, so I won't go into a lot of details on this slide. We will, when we come back with an ordinance, if you decide to move forward, also propose a recommendation change to your fee resolution to adopt fees. And again, the recommendation is that any ownership project be allowed to pay the fee, and any rental project with 20 units or less be allowed to pay the fee. There's a lot of, as you heard, the ownership projects get very tricky with that, and it's actually very advisable that they just pay the fee, and then the city can use that to provide other affordable housing. Then the final item tonight is really, what are some of those other alternative means of compliance? Now, we know that you can do the in lieu fee, but do you want to allow other options for a developer to comply, such as building off-site within the city? That would be with them purchasing property and building units there to meet the requirements. Can they donate land within the city for a affordable developer to come in and build on? Or do you want to allow them to purchase market rate units and convert those to affordable units? Now, on this last point, the conversion, there are some limits on how those could be counted towards your RENA. I verified with HCD, there are circumstances that they do allow it to be counted, but it's very tricky and very limited of where they can do that. So that's kind of is an option, but I would not put that last one high up on the option list because it may not count to your RENA there. So with that, these are kind of the bullet points that we talked about tonight, and we want some of that policy direction from you and to see, where does the city want to go with this? Once we have that direction, we'll continue working with staff. We'll draft up an ordinance, and the recommended changes to the fee resolution will need to go back to your planning commission through public hearing for a final recommendation to you for adoption. And that will conclude my report, and myself and Kathy are here for any questions.
What, you're looking for direction this evening, correct?
I think the purpose of the study session is to seek any direction or input or feedback. But as part of your staff report and as part of the posted agenda, we also have included a copy of a community survey we did as part of our general plan update. We also included a draft ordinance for your review and consideration. Those will be available. I would point out that the city has not done robust, I'm going to call it community outreach since that time. We have not spoken with, how would this impact developers, if that's something you want us to look into. There certainly was some information and questions raised tonight that staff did not have answers for. We certainly can come back and do another study session if you would like with those specific answers. Also, I think providing this information to you also gave us great reference points for what some other cities are doing. And if you would like us to, reach out to counterparts further to gauge any additional information, I think what was really clear to me in the last couple of weeks and even tonight is this no one-size-fits-all approach, which tends to also be typical Monrovia. So direction, feedback, input tonight based on the discussion is what's most helpful at this time.
So I called Sherry earlier and gave her my 11 questions on this draft ordinance, so I'm good.
I have a question,
Wanna-
Sherry. How is all this enforced? Who or what mechanism do we have to make sure that these lower rents are actually being charged and paid by the tenants? Do we have to create some sort of system within City Hall that goes out and checks to make sure that the tenants aren't being taken advantage of by the landlords?
Monitoring.
Do you want to?
Well, I will say the ordinance will have enforcement ability. There are reporting requirements where the owners, property owners would need to report to the city annually on what the rents they're receiving, provide contact information so the city can do verification. All that's included in that, as well as I said, give you the ability to enforce it like you would be able to enforce any other part of your municipal code.
I was
Could
just
I-
gonna say, maybe
So the
Craig
ordinance-
has
Isn't there something like a monitoring fee?
Well, the city, the ordinance, should an ordinance be produced, it would have a monitoring component.
Right.
Part of the agreement would be with the city, verified by the city attorney. We already monitor annually, for example, the Avalon project, where they submit their verification of rents. We get a report annually to make sure that those units are being filled by the income households of the group.
Craig,
If I could just add, and then I'll turn the mic to Craig. So there's a lot of different agreements that the city has used in the past, recent agreements, as well as past agreements going back to the late 80s and early 90s. So up to this point, most of the compliance review has been done through city staff. There are legal requirements and repercussions for failing to follow those. At the extent that we move forward with the inclusionary housing requirement, if you take the 1,900 housing units that we've built over the last several years, and let's just say applied a 10% inclusionary requirement to those, that's approximately 190 of those units. I think at that point, the city would be looking at more of a partner that we would use to do annual compliance, because most of the compliance requirements will all be required on an annual basis.
Okay.
Edward, Pamela?
I just wanted to, as we all know, this is nothing new to us in Monrovia. We've been working on housing, and housing has been an issue as it relates to low income, very low income, and looking at, and as you said, nothing new. You've shown us these wonderful presentations before, and seeing the big gap between what we want to produce and what we are actually producing. It just seems so unfair, because there's a big gap there, and we got to try to figure out how do we reach the people. The other thing I wanted to ask with regard to the inclusionary housing, that something to think about. How are we looking at that? Say the petition that went out and that was turned in that you had mentioned, with regard to some of the things that Monrovians are asking for, and is that plausible? Is that possible as it relates to setting aside 20% per 10 units, for example? That's something that people are asking for, and I'd like to hear the possibilities of that, as well as letters that are coming in and emails that are coming in where Monrovians are really needing and wanting low income and very low, and to increase that number. And I know we've talked a lot about that tonight. But I think for me, I know that the builders, as she said, 15% of nothing is nothing, right? But how does that really flesh out in real time? What does that really look like? And you don't have to answer that now, but it's something that I'd like to have more answers for. How can we increase the very low income units? How can we do that in a really real way? Because I think when you said one size does not fit all, every community is different. I just believe that that's what Monrovia has been asking for, and we've been asking for it for a very long time. People are having a hard time living here. They're moving out. It's affecting our school districts. And this is nothing new. We've talked about this a million times, but it's worth, as you're going back to research and to work further, to keep that on the forefront of how do we increase the very low housing requirement based upon the incentives that we have right now.
Great.
I have a comment. too.
Oh,
I
okay,
just-
go
I
ahead.
strongly support the inclusionary housing, and I realize we have to balance the rights of the tenants with the property owners, but I just don't want us to lose sight. Their primary purpose of all of this discussion should be to provide affordable housing for Monrovians. That's the most important thing that I'm concerned with.
Yeah, me too.
Then, I mean, I've got so many questions or whatever, but I think first and foremost, since we have not reached out to them, I think it is very important that we reach out to developers, especially those that build a lot in Monrovia, to see how this impacts them, or developers in general. And I don't know to what extent, maybe one of you can answer that, lenders are involved and how it affects when you have inclusionary housing ordinances, how that affects the formulas for lending. I don't know. I just don't know. And also, I think there was a number thrown out since, I want to say 2017. Don't hold me to this. 2017, there's been something like 400 different housing laws put into effect, a lot. And currently, and I know there's more that are going into effect January 1. And when some of these other inclusionary ordinances went into effect, you didn't have all that going on, all the by right stuff. And so, and housing density, our bonus density and all that. So I really would like to know how those two come together, because there was a comment made earlier, and that's one of my concerns about the incentivizing of developer, just say, well, why should I even worry about this? I'll just go to my by right and I'll just build the highest density or whatever, and I'll do it that way. Maybe that pencils out better for me. And so I know that in Monrovia, we like to work with a developer and provide the project that fits Monrovia the best. So I really like to know how all the housing laws, and the current ones especially, and the ones that are coming down are going to take effect January 1st, or maybe even, like I said, there's been a lot, and I don't see any reason why there won't be a whole lot more going on, how that affects inclusionary housing. In lieu fee, did we talk about, and I'm sorry if I missed this, did we talk about a price, a percentage? So,
Not,
There were,
oh, the 29?
yeah, and these are the numbers that.
oh, okay,
that we
I'm
had
sorry.
talked about. We have
Okay,
the per unit
all
and
right.
then the per square
Per
footage.
square foot.
And then again, the per square footage, there's a recommendation for a sliding scale on the smaller, so those numbers would go down for the smaller projects.
Okay, great. Then we've got that. And I am very curious as to the other cities, especially in San Gabriel Valley, why, if they had one, they put it on hold, or they modified it, or they just outright revoked it. What happened for them? Or even if they modified it, what wasn't working for them? And because truly, there is no one size fits all. And then we mentioned a couple of times subsidies. That is a real big question. Where do we have the wherewithal to provide a subsidy? Now, if you're taking in those in lieu fees, then you're building a nest egg there. But that's, maybe you have it, maybe you don't. Like you said, you have to have willing developers paying those fees. So to what extent we would have, what level of subsidy would we really need to have to be able to offer developers, to incentivize them to do this? Let me see. Don't know. I think that would be very interesting, again, why they are on hold. They had them, it's either on hold, modified, or revoked. And I think that was, and I'd like to know about talking to the developers. Yes, Edward?
All good points. I think Sergio, Dr. Kelly, sorry, Councilmember Jimenez, Councilman Kelly, many of us have said it repeatedly, and we hear it in the community. Everyone knows the rents are extremely high. We have a lot of great businesses in Monrovia as well. When people can barely afford to pay rent, that means they're not going to go out and shop at your local store. They're not going to go out to your restaurant on a regular basis. They're going to cook at home. They're going to hang out at home just so they can actually pay that rent, so they actually have a place to live. It's a problem, of course, across LA County. It's not unique to Monrovia, but it does mean that we should take an action to try to make sure we reduce that burden on folks here. And so the more people can actually stay and live in Monrovia, that grew up in Monrovia, same problem in LA County in general right now, but I think it really hits home here. And I think to that point of what other cities, it's important to look at that, but there is a lot of evidence that shows that these inclusionary housing ordinances have been put in place in a lot of other places in cities nearby, like Pasadena, South Pasadena, where developers are still coming in there and they're still building. There's a City of LA example where they just, they put a lot of, removed a lot of restrictions on folks. Zero subsidy, people are putting 100% affordable housing units, meaning the developers know how to squeeze out profit. And also, these rents, right? The rents that we're proposing to charge people, these are rents that most people in Monrovia are probably paying right now. So these are not, these are.
They're not affordable.
They're not affordable rents to begin with. They still are easy, it's still easy to make a profit off that rent. That's why people are putting them in there. When you charge $2,000 a month on 50 units and you can't pay that back after you built it, I don't think that's a problem for developers. It's not. Can they not? Are they losing some slice of potential pie? They are, you're right. But what's that feedback loop? Is that they're getting a community that people live here, people can afford to go out and support the shop that they built underneath the units, so it doesn't stay vacant the whole time. So there's a trade-off there, but it's not a huge loss that is an imaginary loss necessarily.
Well, to your point, Edward, then not only where they had them and they either put them on hold or revoked or modified, but where they've had them and they've been very successful.
Yeah.
Why were they successful? And where there are subsidies, where did those subsidies come from? How were they able to offer those subsidies? I know, obviously, Pasadena, and they have land and things like that that they can throw in, and they can offer other perks for the developer subsidies. So, and on the process, just our planning department, time is money. LA, they slashed all sorts of
Right. Restrictions. in terms of how
restrictions
long
and
they
whatnot.
could buy
And the
what, yeah.
developers were even finding that they didn't have to go get public money. They could make it work on their own. At any rate, what we could do to possibly make the process less expensive for the developer and thereby making it easier to build. So if we have those answers, all of the above.
Yeah, I mean, I think that getting to the questions as well about the pricing and the percentages, I almost recommend that we suggest just matching it with the density bonus law. That seems to be something that people have found works. I don't see why those numbers, like the 15% and the 24%, I think it's low, but 15%, very low. Like those kind of numbers seem like it would make it'd be easier for us to, since we're talking about density bonus anyways, like a lot of cities just line it up with the state code anyways, since it just makes simpler. And have those as our thresholds for how much you should include. And then it's simple, right? It's a pretty clear process. And that density bonus gives you those incentives inherently, right? To cut some of the costs to the developer. And in exchange, the city gets some lower interest, some lower cost rate housing. And I think the ownership solution, though, that you were talking about, there's a problem with if you have ownership units and they have to be, you have to resell it I think you could solve that easily by just creating some type of allowed increase on a percent basis. That's like a simple.
Claremont did
Change it
work
to make it,
it
yeah. I mean,
out.
that's a simple solution.
They didn't?
They haven't done it yet, but they can. We can. We'll do it good. Because you'll give us some great advice. Thanks.
So if you,
I'm sorry, if I can just finish.
yes, ma'am, go ahead.
If you establish, and I totally get
Yeah,
the equity of that. the
Could you come real quick up to the mic? Thanks.
I totally get it's a more equitable scenario, and a fair number of cities have done it. So you're right, that allowing a certain amount of profit for sure. But what it means then is the second buyer isn't getting an affordable price.
You could just sell it back to the city. You could sell it to another land trust. Like you could create a lot of options to make it do what we want it to do.
Okay.
There's so many things that we can be doing. If we had been at the table a long time ago, prior to them building all the units down on the southern end of town, if we were here working on an inclusionary housing back then, like we are now, we would have affordable housing.
Possibly. That's not a given. It's not
A
a
few
given.
folks, I
Not a
think, were
given.
on city council during those actions.
Well, it doesn't matter about city council. I'm just saying, regardless who was on city council, I said if we were at the table doing what we're doing now, we would have more affordable units.
That's
period.
good. So we should make action happen now.
I think,
That's what you're saying, I think.
I think at this point, to staff, we should, number one, say, yes, we want inclusionary housing. Number two, we need it's survey information from surrounding cities on what the mayor had pointed out, what works and what does not work and why. And number three, options on the threshold number where inclusionary housing at what point kick in. And also the percentage of total units of development that are going to be low income, so that we have the information so we can make a really good informed choice.
And I think we need the answers to those questions before we commit
Yes.
to anything. So at any rate, okay, thank you so very much. And we may, I guess, maybe be seeing you again, but I think we've given you lots of things, Sherry.
Yes, we'll be busy
to think-
working on these questions.
Thank you,
providing-
Thanks
thank
for all
you
your
so
time with
very
that.
much. This is a very,
Thank you.
it's a very complicated issue. So at any rate, with that,
We'll get there.
with that, thank you very much, and we are now going to adjourn this meeting, this study session at 6:45. And Mr. Steele, would you like to announce our closed session?
Turner, there it is. Council meeting closed session regarding the one item on the posted agenda, conference with real property negotiator, Government Code Section 54956.8. The APN is 8515013055. The city manager is negotiating with the Terry McAuliffe, co-trustee of the TNC McAuliffe Trust, under negotiation, price and terms and payment.
Thank you. So we will then go into closed session, and we'll be back at 7:30 for our regularly scheduled meeting.